for this first session of the afternoon. I'm really, really glad to have with us, and I hope all of you are already in the room. We're gonna hear from Renee Sieber from McGill University, from Nathan Matias and Megan Price from Cornell and the Human Rights Data Analysis Group, and from Christo Hall from Macmaster University, as well as Emily Osborne from the Canadian Shield Institute. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Renee Sieber, who is an associate professor in the Department of Geography of McGill, who is also one of the stewards of PAIRS, who was instrumental in the organization of the first edition of PAIRS and the second one. And she will present a work on non-expert and civil society organization responses to AI deployment, and especially efforts to document and categorize the pushback and resistance against AI deployment. Renee, if you would like to present the slides, the floor is yours. Otherwise, I can fetch them.
No, can you see my slides?
I need to stop the sharing, and normally you should be able. Wonderful, they're on the screen.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. I'm here with my research assistant, Roberta Dew. Hi, Roberta. She did a lot of the legwork on our session today, our panel today, our talk today called Citizen Resistance to AI. So why are we talking about citizen resistance to AI? Because resistance in modern AI policy discourse is considered bad. It's anti-innovation. You're a bunch of Luddites, you're illiterate, and you're opposed to progress and also against digital sovereignty. What's interesting about Canada is that compared to OECD countries, the Canadian public distrusts AI more than the other countries. And I would argue that's a bellwether of other countries. Interestingly enough, there's a public-private sector resistance to the resistance. And people may disagree with me, but arguably AI literacy and trustworthy AI are examples of that resistance to the resistance. Let's teach people that AI is good for them. And we could see that in this little quote from about EU tech policy. While the EU panels were presented giving voice to everyday citizens and improving democratic legitimacy in policymaking, in practice, they serve to build support for current policy that replicates the interests of big tech. In addition to that, arguably pairs needs to include not just cooperating with the public and private sectors in the participatory discourse, but resisting those sectors. So on to our methods. So we followed a couple of definitions from Simsek and Yazzer and from Agnew, where resistance, on the one hand, can be macro. It can speak to societal and economic and political consequences, but it also can be micro in terms of everyday resistance, in which individuals employ routine measures to counteract surveillance and assert autonomy. It is also technical, and thankfully, Agnew talks about various technical approaches to resistance, whether that's physical resistance or whether that's through, say, privacy-enhancing technologies or adversarial attacks. We, primarily Roberta, drew on news articles. I gave some examples here, blog posts, reports from non-governmental and advocacy organizations. There are many. We did focus primarily in the global north to identify how communities, workers, and individuals, I'll use a colloquial term, citizens, react when AI systems when these citizens are impacted by AI systems, infrastructures, corporations, and governments. So you're about to see a lot of words here is our taxonomy. So we sought to create a taxonomy of the different types of resistance that's out there as a prelude to later on looking at how they manifest in various locations. So that's a mouthful. So I'm just going to talk about a few of them. So, often when we talk in pairs and elsewhere about resistance, we focus on resistance to the algorithm or resistance to scraping data in large language models. But increasingly, we're seeing resistance in the form of physical protests, whether that's picketing Palantir or whether that's the UK students ditching the off-qual algorithm. There's many, many examples of that. And the key concerns include militarization, environmental impacts, job security, uh, or unjust algorithms. And you can see the types of AI targeted. And indeed, any one of these methods of resistance will see different key concerns and different types of AI targeted. Legal actions, we're seeing numerous examples of legal actions. Thank you, Foxglove, where there are lawsuits challenging AI. And this could be through creative copyright claims about misuse of IP, or this could be in which creatives want compensation, or they want to at least be able to opt into the scraping of their content. It could also be lawsuits for wrongful death or physical or mental harm, as in the character.ai lawsuit. And you can see how the types of AI targeted are generative AI or deep fakes. uh, Fighting AI with AI. This is something I'm really, really interested in, and this is the use and development of counter AI tools. This is citizens using the AI themselves, whether that is creating platforms on social media that are algorithm free or turning facial recognition on the police. And the key concerns are autonomy and privacy. And um, obviously, a lot of the AI targeted is surveillance, whether that's facial recognition technology or closed circuit TVs or drones with cameras. Surveillance evasion. These are individuals or collective strategies to avoid surveillance, and that can range from the very physical invisibility cloaks or makeup used to change lighting on the face or umbrellas used as protests. We saw that in Hong Kong. Key concerns are privacy and autonomy, and once again, a lot of the AI targeted is surveillance AI. On to item number 10, method of resistance number 10. Unions play a huge role here too. Workers play a huge role, as well as gig workers play a huge role. So they may withhold their labor or they may challenge working conditions. For example, you may see gig workers refusing unfair algorithm contracts, and the key concerns are labor rights. The type of AI targeted could be this workplace surveillance, whether in a warehouse or the use of algorithms to determine, for example, where Grab cars or Uber cars need to go. And lastly, which is kind of the flip side of all this negativity in resistance, is the use of joy and comedy to resist AI. And this is a use by artists of irony, sarcasm, and other techniques to oppose AI. So I have on the back of my laptop a sticker from Save the AI, which comes out of the University of Toronto. They make stickers, they make posters. An example would be stop drinking water, AI is thirsty. Or stop barbecuing. AI needs your coal. So those are examples. Also, there are virtual reality games, an example from the National Film Board of Canada that allows non-experts to envision the trolley problem. And key concerns are basically to laugh at AI to keep from crying about AI. And this impacts a broad range of AI, predominantly generative AI, but also physically data centers. So that is the briefest of discussions of the types of AI, resistance to AI that we found. And in conclusion, it is important to reiterate that citizens are not passive recipients of technology, but they're active and they critically engage in how AI is used and deployed. That um, civic resistance is not a uniform phenomenon, but rather a dynamic process marked by overlapping methods, intersecting concerns, and varying outcomes. And I give you an example here where, for example, Uber can raise multiple concerns, whether it's transparency about the algorithm, collaboration, privacy, worker rights, or health and social equity. And these concerns from citizens can generate various resistance strategies, from physical protests from gaming the algorithm to labor organizing and legal actions. And recognizing the actions and voices of citizens is critical for understanding how AI is experienced, aka resisted, in practice, and for realizing the gaps in resistance strategies that can build stronger systems of meaningful civic participation. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Renee. If you have some question for Renee and Roberta, since this work is a collaboration, feel free to ask them in the chat immediately or and without waiting anymore because we are slightly off schedule already. I'm gonna hand the floor to Nathan and Matias. Sorry, Nathan Matias from Cornell University and Megan Price from Human Rights Data Analysis Group, who are gonna talk about the involvement of the public in AI science and especially in quantitative evaluation of AI safety and reliability. Nathan, please take it away. You're already sharing the screen. That's great. Let me, sorry,
Hello,
and Megan,
can
and
you hear
let
me?
me actually, yes, normally you're both able to unmute now. Sorry about that.
Hi, thanks so much. And that was sort of the perfect segue into our paper and our talk today, because we chose to open this paper about public involvement in improving the science of AI with the story of nurses from the Kaiser Health System who went on strike in the spring of 2024. And a key component of what they were objecting to was the use of AI within the hospital system. But the thing that Nathan and I wanted to really point out about their protest was that their argument wasn't don't use these AI tools at all. Their argument was involve us in evaluating their performance and deciding the ways that they get used. And just to provide a slight update from that story that opens our paper, this has been an ongoing negotiation within the broader Kaiser system. So in December of 2025, Kaiser therapists were also negotiating to have AI tools specifically addressed within their contract with the larger system. And more broadly, the use of AI has become an important new point of discussion between the National Union of Healthcare Workers and management. And just on a personal note, the San Francisco Unified School District was on strike last week. That's where my kids go to school. And part of what they were negotiating was about the use of AI within schools. So this is not an issue that's going away. It's a topic that labor is very actively engaging in. And so that was where we really kind of started the structure of our paper. But I want to hand it off to Nathan for why this paper? Why did we feel like this was the argument that needed to be put forth?
Yeah, we're both statisticians, scientists who work with civil society, and we'll say more about ourselves. And we were really intrigued by this question. Let's say the nurses union does succeed at getting a seat at the table of AI governance in the Kaiser system. Uh, from a scientific perspective, what could they do and what practices would help make sure that that involvement in the evaluation of AI systems actually improved the quality of the science that evaluates AI. One of the big questions that often is left underexplored in conversations about participatory methods is the question of rigor and quality. We all know the value it brings to democracy, and at the same time, it's worth asking, how do we make sure that this kind of work is producing highly reliable, valid results? I should include a little bit about myself and why I am asking this question. I'm a professor at Cornell University, and for over a decade, I've worked alongside communities, social movements, the public to test the social impacts of digital technologies and discover effective ideas for change. And I get to do that alongside the extraordinary people of the Citizens and Technology Lab and the many community liaisons and partners that we collaborate with.
And likewise, I run the Human Rights Data Analysis Group. We call ourselves HRDAG. And we are a small team of data scientists who partner with civil and human rights advocates to leverage the power of more rigorous data processing and data analysis to advance that advocacy work. And so we have been thinking collectively as a team for years and in some cases decades about various tools from statistics and computer science, some of which now are called machine learning and artificial intelligence. And so we really wanted to think hard about this intersection between our work very closely with frontline activists and the ways that these tools are getting implemented right now. So, one of the first things that we wanted to address in the paper is just by nature of the socio-technical aspects of the high stakes areas where these tools are getting used. What are the challenges that are posed by those different elements? And so we sort of unpack all of those challenges, and I'll just very briefly run through them. I think in this case, for this audience, a lot of this is going to feel very familiar. The way that the reliability of a model is embedded in these multiple layers of social and technical factors that surround the way the model is getting implemented. The need to evaluate these tools and the ways they perform in context. There's an argument that automated systems can build consistency specifically by reducing the discretion of decision makers. But in these highly context dependent domains, such as public health, criminal justice, child welfare, just to name a few examples, reductions in discretion can override important context expertise that organizations rely on to make those systems workable, safe, and humane. So we have to take that into account when we're evaluating these systems. Security risks are posed by any number of different ways these tools get used. I'll just say briefly that the introduction of AI can create further surface areas for risk that need to get taken into account. And then lastly, transparency is obviously not unique to these tools, but just like in other contexts, it's the interested parties who often have the power and the ability to direct the production, publication, and interpretation of evidence in their own interests. And so it's something that we need to sort of tackle how to unpack that and change some of those incentives and provide more transparency into evaluations where perhaps a tool did not perform as well as expected. So those are the challenges that we laid out.
So in the paper, which you can find published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, we also lay some groundwork for what we mean by public involvement in research, sharing the classic literature. And one of the spectrums that people often talk about when discussing the science of participatory research is this spectrum between contributory science and co-created science. In contributory science, researchers define upfront the kind of data and information they need, and then solicit the public or partners to produce that data. And that has achieved great things. Here at Cornell, we have the Lab of Ornithology, where people all around the world have donated data about the birds that they found. And a lot of AI research takes this contributory model where researchers are asking the public for data sets or sometimes even scraping and acquiring data sets without asking for permission. And then on the other side of the spectrum, there's co-created science, where the people who are affected by the research are very deeply involved in every aspect of the research process, from setting the agenda to in being involved in the data analysis and interpretation of the results. In this paper, we also say a little bit about participatory governance, mostly to note that that's a very important area that our work doesn't address in depth, because we're primarily focused on this question of the science that is done about AI.
And so we also wanted to address or at least outline the state of the literature on concerns that have been raised about these participatory approaches. And I just want to note that the visualization on this slide is a visualization of the papers in our article and the citation network between them. I think it's a really cool visualization. Thank you, Nathan, for generating that via citationgraph.org. So that's something that all of you can do with your references. But again, we listed out these concerns and tried to summarize the state of that literature. For the sake of time, I'm only going to linger on the last one, which is this question of cost, pace, and scale. And it is true that collaborations require training and resources to support authentic community engagement. And this can mean that participatory approaches require longer timelines and bigger budgets. But we and the research in this area find that the quest for premature scale often appears to provide the appearance of speed rather than actual speed and faster results. And technologists, especially out here in California where I am, have a reputation for moving fast by ignoring the situations and experiences of people who must live with the consequences. And the resulting errors, costs, delays, and irreversible harms can often exceed any benefits argued that can be produced by producing products or papers just a little bit faster. And our position very firmly is that the production of rigorous and reliable science takes time, resources, and care to get right. So that's just one of the concerns that is often brought up in this context.
So we also took some time to outline some areas where the science of AI evaluation benefits from public involvement. And I'm going to walk through a few of them, and then Megan and I will share a brief story for a couple of these examples. And we picked things that cover from the beginning to the end of the research process. One of the things we talked about was equipoise, this commitment to methodology given uncertainty. The idea that science can bring people to the table when they disagree, with the possibility of following the results. And we have some stories and literature on that. We talk about measurement and the importance of community role in measurement and being sure what you are actually observing in your evaluations. Explanation is this conversation among computer scientists about our understanding of what exactly a model does, or why exactly or how exactly people are behaving in the way that we see them behave. And talking to people turns out to be pretty important. There, we discuss inference, the means by which you draw conclusions from your data and involving the public in inference. And then interpretation, the process of making sense of the practical and societal and scientific implications of a particular finding. Megan has a story about measurement to share.
Yeah, I'll just very quickly mention a project that we did in close collaboration with investigative journalists at the Invisible Institute and more than 200 volunteers who were reviewing police complaint records that had been published under the categories the police assigned to those complaints. So the police could aggregate and say, we received this many complaints this year that fell under the heading of inappropriate search. But then when community members went through and rigorously read and evaluated those complaints, what they found was that many of them detailed interactions that fell under the heading of sexual violation. And so it was crucial to get that lived experience of the community and to have their review of what the police had categorized versus the way the community would reflect those own experiences to each other to really get that measurement piece right.
And a story about interpretation. In 2015, I worked with a group of people who basically went on strike against a large online platform. And we collected a lot of data about that mobilization. And one of the things I did was participatory hypothesis testing, where we collectively organized people who'd been involved in the strike and those who hadn't, and asked them for their theories and interpretations of the data. And we used that to create a back and forth between the statistical models and thousands of people online. So another example of involving people in interpretation. Last thing I want to say is that based on this paper coming out, we've been really excited and wonderfully overwhelmed by all the enthusiasm for the science of participatory AI evaluation, and we're now organizing a community of practice. We had about 50 people attend our last meeting, so if you're interested in joining and continuing this conversation, we'd love to see you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for this presentation. We're gonna jump in straight ahead to keep a bit of a Q&A time for the Q&A at the end. So normally, if my calculations are correct, now it is the turn of Christo and Emily from Lancaster University and Shield Institute on how to make CSO participation in the how to bake CSO participation in the existing tools part of the Hiroshima AI process. Transparency and reporting frameworks. Let me make sure that you can unmute, and the floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Pierre. I can see you've done a great job of curating this session because there's a lot of overlap with what we've done and the previous speakers have done. This is going to have a little bit more of an international governance flavor. So I'm Christo Hall. I'm a digital policy researcher at McMaster University in Canada, and I'm joined by my colleague Emily Osborne, who is a researcher at the Canadian Shield Institute, which is a new think tank working on economic sovereignty for Canada. So we developed this work as winners of the International Policy Ideas Challenge, which is a national award funded by Global Affairs Canada and the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. And we presented this work to Global Affairs in December late last year. So we're going to throw lots of critiques at the Hiroshima AI process today, but we do want to say from the offset that it's quite unique in the international AI governance space, and it's a great first step in that it's developed a code, and it's convinced many of the, or if not all of the frontier labs, at least in the US, to sign up. Its greatest asset in this space, it's transparency, and that's its USP in comparison to other international AI initiatives. But it could leverage that transparency better to increase public accountability and to add legitimacy and trustworthiness both to the process and to the participating organizations. And we think that a multi-stakeholder review process offers a lot of promise in doing that. And we'll be briefly discussing some options for that, for the design of that. So I don't know how many people are familiar with the Hiroshima AI process in the room, but we'll briefly give an overview of it for those who aren't familiar. It's a policy framework developed in the G7, and it has three main policy instruments that make it up. The first is the Code of Conduct, which was developed in 2023 as part of Japan's G7 presidency. And this is a translation of the OECD AI principles into an instrument of governance. And it's essentially a document that lists the values and expectations of AI developers and deployers. And then the following year in Italy, under their presidency of the G7, the reporting framework was established, and this has been implemented by the OECD, and it allows organizations to submit and report compliance with the code. And then finally, the Hype brand, which is essentially a symbol for participating organizations to show their compliance. And even though the OECD state that it's not specifically a sort of signal of certification, it essentially acts in that way in terms of trust building. So the original mission of the Hype in 2023 speaks of increasing accountability, responsibility, and transparency in the AI ecosystem. But as geopolitics has shifted in the previous few years, and quite dramatically so, there's been a lot of mission drift. And we've seen far fewer references to those core tenets in recent G7 communiques. The other issue is that it is a voluntary initiative, and we've only seen 25 submissions thus far. We're coming up to a year now since the reporting framework was launched in April 2025. So that's just a slow trickle of organizations, and really just a fraction of eligible organizations. If you think about the OECD's amount of nations that it covers, it's really just a fraction. And in its current state, it's not really a signal of accountability and trustworthiness. And for that, it requires more legitimacy. So, I mean, why is it important to legitimize this process? And I think that the World Economic Forum's report in December last year, I think, captures this very well. And they state in that report that less than 1% of organizations using AI are operationalizing it fully responsibly. And some of the reasons for that is that we see limited comprehensive regulatory approaches around the world. Some of the most advanced of those domestically are the likes of the European Union and South Korea and Brazil. Even those are applying similar kinds of auditing logics. So that's third-party professionalized compliance services or first-party self-assessments. But we think it's a missed opportunity for those regulatory regimes to not include diverse stakeholders in assessments. Brazil might be the closest to achieving that, but probably not far enough. And I think, as the previous set of speakers show, that there's democratic and anticipatory governance value in including those stakeholders. And at the international level, the appetite for new institutions and policy frameworks is low. So with that lack of appetite, building on an established mechanism that already exists, like the Hiroshima AI process, that offers a great potential to inject accountability back into the conversation. So one of our main takeaways is that the Hiroshima AI process, if it's strengthened and legitimized through a multi-stakeholder review system, then that can help close some of those governance and accountability gaps in the absence of widespread regulation.
All right, so as Christo said, we believe that the multi-stakeholder governance model has a lot of potential in this context. Multi-stakeholder initiatives, or MSIs, as you'll hear us call them, offer several benefits. Most importantly, they can increase accountability. And beyond that, they can, even though they are not a permanent replacement for hard law, they can help build important capacity for eventual regulation down the line. And because they fall somewhere between the extremes of mandatory and voluntary instruments, they can often represent a really attractive compromise for both industry and regulators. There is also some precedent for the type of MSI that we are proposing, both within the context of the tech sector and at the OECD. And we drew inspiration from some of these existing examples. First, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, or the EITI. which sets out requirements for the governance of extractive industries, including requirements for stakeholder engagement. And one really interesting feature about this MSI is its use of a public scoring system that evaluates countries based on their implementation of the EITI standard. And you can see some examples of how this works in practice on our slide. A couple other examples include the World Summit on the Information Society, also called WSIS, which establishes the importance of multi-stakeholder collaboration for addressing issues that cross borders, internet governance in this case, and we believe also AI governance. The OECD's Development Assistance Committee, which uses peer review of its members as an accountability tool, is also an example. All this to say that MSIs are a feasible option in many different contexts for a variety of different issues. So now for exactly what it is that we are proposing. We believe that can you go to the next slide? Sorry, thanks. We believe that a multi-stakeholder body could be employed by the HYPE to review submissions made to the reporting framework. This would increase accountability by holding AI developers responsible for the content of their submissions, which currently does not happen. The only check is whether or not they have submitted and answered all the questions, and can support future regulatory efforts that would then further increase accountability down the line. It would also build on the precedent for meaningful stakeholder engagement in AI governance, which we think is essential, and would help legitimize the HYPE as a real signal of trustworthiness, since there would be more scrutiny in the process and the HYPE brand would actually mean something. So as part of our research, we conducted interviews with key would-be stakeholders for this process across Canada. Largely, they were very supportive of the idea that we were proposing, and we heard a lot of key insights from them, including that peer review could act more like a conversation between reviewers and developers, in which developers would get feedback and be able to implement it so that each could reap more value from the process. And that often it's what is omitted from submissions in transparency initiatives like this that is the most significant, and that stakeholders with the necessary expertise can help surface that. So from our interviews with stakeholders, we also quickly realized that an MSI could take numerous different forms in the context of the HYPE. And there are numerous variables in both what the process and the outputs could look like, and you can see these on the screen. We think that there would be a lot of value in a collaborative, dialogic-based process, as emphasized by some of the stakeholders we spoke with. And while completely transparent outputs would be best aligned with the principles of the HYPE, transparency, it may be necessary to keep certain details confidential in order to make certain stakeholders with various constraints willing to participate. And ideally, the review process would also lead to scores that determine eligibility for the HYPE brand, kind of like the EITI. And this would provide the highest level of normative force to the outputs, but it may ultimately be necessary to opt for a less forceful version due to political feasibility constraints. So then that leads us to an important limitation that was often pointed out to us. The HYPE, at the end of the day, emerged from the G7, and given current geopolitical tensions, it is unlikely that all members would agree to a change that adds oversight and increases scrutiny. So this is where our multiple design options come in. There are ways that we can make the process more palatable to all G7 members if needed, by opting for some of the less forceful options. However, if this still isn't possible, many of the same benefits could be reaped by hosting the process externally from the G7 and OECD. The submissions are public, since this is a transparency initiative, which means theoretically anybody could go review and score the submissions however they would like. So it would be possible for a coalition of willing countries or stakeholders to take charge and lead an informal multi-stakeholder HYPE review process. And this format would even enable the peer review to get around some of the inherent limitations in the G7 and OECD, which could be very powerful in its own right. Right. Thank you so much for listening. That marks the end of our presentation, and we look forward to hearing your questions.
Wonderful. Great timekeeping. I'm sorry. I think that we're going to have to cut the questions because the next session is about to start.